welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy, and it's now been running for over 100 episodes. And so that's what today's podcast is going to be all about. It's going to be about why I started the podcast, how I think we're doing after 100 episodes, and where I think I see the podcast going. Kind of a bit of a reflection, which is really what all of this podcast was always about. But let's get into that. So when I tell people who don't watch the podcast or listen to the podcast in my life about what I do with it and why I do it, I always start with the fact that for my job, I got sent on some podcast training so that we could incorporate more interesting and innovative podcasting assignments potentially into the degree course that I run. And as a result of going on that course, I did indeed incorporate some more podcast assignments into my degree, and also started using podcasts as a way for my students to reflect on a module that they've done, on their semester, and all of these sorts of things. But before that all kind of came into place, doing the podcast training with some BBC people that had come to offer some training to some students and also to some staff at the uni that I work at, made me think a little bit about the idea of actually doing my own podcast. I'd done some time on my student radio back at uni and had always enjoyed kind of audio format as a way of sharing stories, talking about things, connecting with people. And whilst my university's student radio was quite small and realistically was only listened to by family and friends, and then also anybody who was unfortunate enough to be in the student union when it was playing, it was something that I think I'd started to miss at about the time when I'd done this training. And there was also a story that was told to us by the people that were running the training that had made me think a little bit. So they told me about this podcast that was run by a group of women who were entirely naked, and whilst it wasn't the subject of the podcast, it obviously had an impact a little bit on the sound, where they recorded, how they recorded, and obviously some forms of topic of conversation. And it made me weirdly think about how you could do interesting and weird things with podcasting and take it out into a different way of recording stuff and share experiences in a different way. So this story of these women who were recording a podcast with something that didn't necessarily impact the audio all that much, but added to the kind of atmosphere of what was being recorded, made me think about what I could possibly do that would make my podcast a little bit different, but not necessarily impact the recording of it and things all that much. And this idea of recording in Peggy really came to me when she had to have a little bit of work done, and she was away and I was borrowing my parents' modern car, and I just really missed all of the noises and sounds and things that she made whilst I was driving her. All of the little things that are so very unique to driving a classic car. The fact that you can really hear the engine, the transmission whines, the fact that it's not as soundproofed as everything else nowadays. The fact that the horn and the indicator all make these little noises that add to the character of these cars. And I thought that there's probably quite a lot of people out there who enjoy classic cars but perhaps don't have the privilege of being able to drive theirs as regularly as I do, and they might enjoy listening to a podcast that's recorded in a classic car and has that impacting a little bit on what's recorded and how it's recorded. So I did this little test run where I drove home from work just chatting about my day, about just basically rambling to my phone that was in front of me recording, because the podcast guys had said that, you know, if you've got nothing, you've got your phone, because they are ultimately designed to collect audio, because that's what a phone call is. Obviously they do loads more than that nowadays, but really the audio mic on there shouldn't be atrocious, and it will give you a starting point to go from. And I just chatted away to see what the audio came out like, how much of the car you could actually hear, how much of the like surrounding noise you could hear, and whether I was audible and things. And I played about with it, and then I do what I do with most of these ideas that I have. I run them past Jamie to see if it sounds like a decent idea outside of my head, and he thought it sounded like an interesting one. He was a bit worried about the audio, so then I played him my test run that I'd done in the car, and he was actually quite impressed. I know that if you go back and listen to any of my early podcasts, they aren't as clear audio-wise as they are now, but it was certainly okay enough to be able to hear what was going on, what I was saying, I was talking about, and all of those sorts of things. And so I decided that I'd have a go at it, see how it went, maybe do a couple of episodes and go from there. I'd also started at the same sort of time playing about with setting cameras up and stuff inside the car to record me driving, because I like the idea of having a few little bits of footage of me driving the car, and being able to record if we went away again on another holiday like we had the previous year when we'd gone to Wales. So I thought, well, if I'm recording, you know, my voice through the phone, I could set up a camera somewhere else in the car, just set it off when we set off, try and match up the audio a little bit to the footage, and just have that as an option on YouTube as well. And I think I'm so glad I did that, because I'm pretty sure most people do watch along on YouTube now as well as listening on the audio format. But it just gives something else, and it's given me the opportunity to really share clips and footage of some of the events that I've gone along to and I'm talking about as well. And I guess that leads quite nicely into me deciding exactly what it is that I wanted to talk about on my podcast. What was the content? I'd sorted out kind of the idea of the car being the studio, even though the podcast training had said that recording next to glass is one of the worst things you can do for audio, and I'm sat in a car that's got probably double the amount of glass of some modern cars. But it's not been too bad, I don't think. And so then I was, okay, right, so what we're going to talk about? And I decided that there was kind of lots of content out there about trying different cars, about trying out different experiences of classic cars, and I really wanted to just say, okay, well, what's it like to just live with a car? What's it like to enjoy a car, use it, take it to places, have adventures in it, and share kind of my reflections and my story about that. So I started to use my podcast kind of like what I trained my students to do, as a way of reflecting on my experiences. So I'd come on and I'd talk about when I'd achieved something with taking it a long distance, or going on a holiday, or fixing something for the first time that I hadn't done before. And one of those podcasts that did really well was when I did a really bad oil change and I messed it up, but it was my first time doing it by myself and I was just learning. It's definitely always been about being honest in the experience of getting to grips with a classic car, using a classic car, and getting your head round what that can look like for you. And I've loved every minute of owning Peggy, and it's been so nice that so much of it has now been recorded and saved so that I can use it to look back on in years to come and think about all of the stuff that we've managed to do, and also, I guess, pick out some stuff that we still want to do. I've owned Peggy now for 3.5 years. We've just celebrated her 55th birthday, so it's been a big period of really reflecting and enjoying how far we've come together lately. We've had the 100th episode of the podcast, which I think technically was the last episode, which was obviously about such a big achievement, which was getting her back up and running after the unfortunate situation. And there's so much more of that to come. We've got so many more milestones coming up with her, and I can't wait to share them with you. The podcast has obviously evolved a little bit since I first started. It was very much primarily in the start about sharing my experiences and just solely focusing on the things that I've done. But I think it's become more and more important for me to use the small little platform that we've built here to gather some other opinions as well and gather some other experiences. So I've really enjoyed gradually adding in occasionally little chats, little interviews with people, be they a big long interview with someone or just a little snippet at a show where I've met up with some people and getting their kind of reflection on the event, which will obviously offer a contrast to when I do my reflection on the event. And I think those have added a little bit of something extra to, I guess, my catalogue of reflections, because it still fits in with my ethos of sharing my experiences, because I'm sharing some of the people that I've met through classic car ownership, which I probably would never have come across without owning a classic car. And it also helps share other experiences of how you can get into classic car ownership, how you can really get the bug for going to shows, working on your own car, whatever that might be for you. I think another way that the podcast has evolved slightly is my use of technology and microphones. Obviously, like I said right at the start, it was literally just recorded on my phone and my camera was behind me. If you're watching on YouTube now, you'll see that we've been able to basically do a 180 and the camera's in front of me now. For a while it's been to the side, but very recently I've experimented with putting it there because I've changed my setup and my cameras and tried different things, and we've now got a tiny little Osmo Action that allows me to really have quite a compact little setup. That means it's not as much of a distraction or in my way as the bigger camera was if that had been on the screen. It was perfectly fine over there, but we've now got the option for it to be a bit more of a thing with us having a chat here. I've obviously had lots of things trying out different microphones. I think I got a microphone for myself pretty quickly, but then it was a case of trying to work out if I had extra people in the car that I wanted to have a chat to, how would that work, how would that set up, and that has been one of the biggest examples of trial and error, I think, with the podcast, and it's still ongoing. I'm still looking for new and different ways to make it easier to record these, because I'm still syncing up audio quite a lot of the time to make it match up with the camera, because the camera audio isn't quite as good as the mics, and so there's still lots to play about with there. But I think it's a slow and steady thing. This isn't obviously something I do full time, but it has been fun to learn about and experiment with and get to grips with. Finally, I think something that's been really special with the podcast and how it's gradually grown has been the kind of connection and conversations that I've been able to have with some of you guys who listen. It's been so nice that some people start to kind of have a chat with me at shows and tell me about stuff that they've listened to, things that they've experienced, and it's been fantastic to hear all of those. It's also allowed me to meet lots of other fantastic people, get me to attend lots of things that I perhaps wouldn't have otherwise heard of, because people are telling me about them, because it's given me a bit of a platform for people to be able to contact me and tell me about some exciting things. And I think before we move on to what's to come with the podcast, I want to just reflect a little bit on the name, because I think I thought it was quite straightforward to me as to why it was called the Passenger Seat Podcast. But I think at the 100th episode, it's probably a pretty good idea to clear up exactly why it's called that. So to go back to that idea of you perhaps listening from your modern car, or listening along and pretending that you're here in the passenger seat with me whilst I chat and tell you about a show or an event that I've recently been to. That's really what it's about. The idea has always been that you are in the passenger seat, having a chat, having a listening to what I'm talking about. And that's why I try in most of my interviews to leave the passenger seat free, or record it from an angle where you might have been if you were in the passenger seat yourself. And that's what it's always been about, is been kind of inviting you into the passenger seat to have a chat, to have a listen in, and hear about my experiences. And I hope you've enjoyed that over the last 100 or so episodes. So what's to come? Well, we've obviously got loads more adventures to have. We've got lots of things to look forward to. We've got the NEC coming up next season, and I'm hoping to conduct loads more interviews and things going into this winter, and really capture a few more stories and exciting things that I've heard about. I've really enjoyed doing a few podcasts that are quite a bit more researched and share a little bit of interesting trivia, interesting stories that I've heard, and I'm looking forward to recording a few more of those in the upcoming between season break. We've also got big plans for Peggy next year, and that does leave me with a bit of uncertainty of exactly what the podcast will go on to look like through that. I'm hoping to have quite a lot of stuff pre-recorded so that you won't notice the little bit of period where Peggy's away having bodywork and stuff done. But inevitably there might have to be some adaptations, some things to try out, some things to record. I do really enjoy trying out a few different cars that would have been available in a similar period to Peggy, so that you can kind of get a comparison point. And it's not really a car test or anything like that, but more if I was in the period, what would my choice be? What would my choice be if I knew what it was like to drive now? So it's still really a reflection on my experiences rather than a well-informed test drive of something. So perhaps we'll have to record a few more of those to fill in the gaps. but basically I'm looking for it to keep going from strength to strength and keep entertaining and informing you guys about what we get up to and what it's really like to own a 1968 Morris Minor called Peggy. So that's really it for today's episode. Thank you all so very much for listening. Thank you also very much for listening to the many episodes that have come before this, and if you haven't already, perhaps take a time in the kind of upcoming between season gap to have a listen, catch up and see what you've been missing, and see how far the podcast has come, or at least I think so anyway. If you're new here and you enjoy kind of hearing the perspective of a young person owning a classic car, then please listen along and subscribe or follow on whatever podcast platform you do listen to this on, and we'll hopefully see, or you'll hear me again very soon. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of this beautiful weather and drive safely and happy motoring.